You worked for 40 years. You showed up. You clocked in. You handed over your mornings, your evenings, your weekends, your energy, every single drop of it, to a paycheck. And that paycheck was supposed to be the thing keeping you alive, financially. That was the deal. Work equals money. No work equals no money. Simple math. Except last summer, at a backyard barbecue in July, a 68-year-old retired guy named Steve looked me dead in the eye. Burger smoke drifting between us, and said 6 words. Words that cracked that entire belief system wide open. He said, I am doing better than ever. 5 years out of the workforce. 0 paychecks. And his bank account was fatter than when he was grinding 50-hour weeks. I stood there holding a lukewarm Bud Light thinking, that is impossible. That breaks the fundamental rule of how money is supposed to work. You stop earning, you start shrinking. That is what they told us. But the deal was hollow, the foundation you built your entire financial identity on. This idea that your paycheck is your lifeline, that retirement is the slow bleed, that the moment you stop working the clock starts ticking on your savings. That whole framework was gutted from the inside and nobody bothered to tell you. Now, I know what you're going to say, Penny. Steve probably had some inheritance. Maybe he got lucky with crypto. Maybe he is just rich. I thought the exact same thing. So I didn't take his word for it. I went and pulled data. I talked to financial planners, interviewed retirees across 4 different states. And here is what I found. Steve isn't an anomaly. He is a pattern. According to data from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, median net worth for households aged 65 to 74 is roughly $410,000. That is higher than every single younger age group, higher than the 35 to 44 crowd grinding through their peak earning years, higher than the 45 to 54 group supposedly hitting their financial stride. The people who stopped working are sitting on more wealth than the people still showing up every Monday morning. Let that sink in for a second. And it is not just a snapshot. Research from the Employee Benefit Research Institute shows a significant percentage of retirees actually see their assets grow during the first decade of retirement. Not shrink, grow. They're pulling money out to live on. And their pile is still getting bigger. That is like draining a swimming pool with a garden hose, while a fire hydrant is filling it from the other end. My name is Penny, and I spend way too much time thinking about the financial mechanics that nobody explains to normal people. If you've ever stared at your paycheck stub, wondering where 35% of your money went before you even touched it, or if you've ever laid awake at 2 a.m., doing retirement math on your phone calculator, feeling a cold knot in your stomach, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to show you is the exact blueprint for why retirement doesn't have to be the financial cliff everyone warned you about. I'm calling this the paycheck paradox. The counterintuitive reality that for a specific group of Americans, the moment they stop earning is the moment they start getting genuinely wealthier. And no, it is not magic, it is not luck. It is 8 overlapping financial mechanisms that kick in simultaneously, the day you walk away from your desk for the last time. But here is where it gets really interesting. Most of these mechanisms are invisible while you're working. You can't see them, you can't feel them. They're buried under tax withholdings and mortgage payments and daycare bills and $6 coffees and the relentless drain of just existing. As a working adult in America, you've been so busy hemorrhaging money in 40 different directions that you never noticed the system was quietly building a launch pad underneath you. And today, we're going to rip the cover off every single one of these mechanisms. 8 reasons why people get richer after they stop working. Some of them are obvious once you hear them. Some of them are going to make you furious that nobody explained this to you sooner. Let's start by burning down the lies. Because you've been fed a story about retirement your entire adult life, and most of it is garbage. Lie number one, your paycheck is your wealth. No, your paycheck is not your wealth. Your paycheck is the exhaust pipe of your labor. It is the bare minimum exchange your employer negotiated to keep you showing up. And here is the part that should make your blood pressure spike. While you were working, that paycheck was being shredded before it ever reached your hands. Federal tax, state tax, Social Security withholding, Medicare, 401k contributions, health insurance premiums. By the time your money hit your checking account, you were looking at maybe 60 to 65 cents on every dollar you earned. You spent 40 years celebrating a number on your offer letter that you never actually received. That is not income. That is a before photo with no after. And yet, this is the number people anchor their entire identity to. I make six figures. No, you don't. You generate six figures for a system that hands you back a fraction and calls it compensation. The paycheck was never the wealth engine. It was the donation box. Your actual wealth was being built somewhere else entirely. In your 401k, in your home equity, in compound growth happening silently in accounts you checked maybe twice a year. But nobody talks about that part because it doesn't feel real until you stop working. Lie number two, retirement means financial decline. This is the big one. The cultural script says you retire, your income disappears, and you slowly watch your savings evaporate like a puddle in August. Every financial ad on television reinforces this. A worried-looking couple at a kitchen table, a shrinking bar graph, some dramatic voiceover asking, "Will you have enough?" They want you terrified. Terrified people buy annuities. Terrified people pay 1.2% management fees without asking questions. Terrified people hand over control. But the data tells a completely different story. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that average annual spending for households aged 65 and older is around $57,000. Compare that to households aged 35 to 54, which spend north of $83,000. That is a $26,000 per year difference. Your expenses don't just dip in retirement, they fall off a cliff, and nobody prepared you for that cliff. Because the financial industry makes $0 when you're calm and confident. Now you might be thinking, okay, but saving on taxes isn't the same. It just means being less poor, more slowly. Fair point. But here is the thing that really gets me. When your outflow drops by $26,000 a year, and your investments are still compounding at 7 or 8% annually, on a portfolio of $500,000 or more, the math flips. You are pulling out $50,000 to live on, but your portfolio is generating $35,000 to $40,000 in growth. The gap between what you withdraw and what you earn shrinks to almost nothing. In good market years, it reverses entirely. Your pile grows while you spend from it. That is not slow decline. That is a financial perpetual motion machine hiding in plain sight. Lie number three. You need to replace your working income in retirement. Every retirement calculator on the internet tells you to target 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income. Sounds reasonable. It is also deeply misleading because that formula is based on your gross income, the inflated number, the one you never took home. You weren't living on $100,000. You were living on $65,000 after taxes and deductions, and all the costs that exist purely because you had a job. Commuting, work clothes, lunches out, decompression spending because you were stressed and exhausted. And Target was right there on the way home. Strip all of that away, and your actual cost of living in retirement might be 45 to 50% of that gross number. But the financial planning industry doesn't want you to know that. Because if you realized you needed $45,000 a year instead of $80,000, you'd stop panic buying their products. This is the paycheck paradox in full bloom. The system convinced you that your paycheck was the oxygen, That without it, you'd suffocate. But the truth is, your paycheck was also the leak. It created the lifestyle, it funded the expenses, it sustained the entire spending architecture that was draining you dry. And the moment it stopped, so did the bleeding. So now that we've torched the three biggest lies, let's get into the actual machinery, the 8 mechanisms behind the paycheck paradox. Because understanding why Steve is sitting on a fatter bank account at 68 than he had at 58 isn't just interesting trivia. It is a financial blueprint that changes how you think about every dollar you earn, and every year you work from this point forward. The first mechanism is the tax guillotine dropping away. And I mean dropping. When you were working and pulling in $100,000 a year, the government was taking its cut before you even opened your banking app. Federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security at 6.2%, Medicare at 1.45%. Add it all up, and you were handing over somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, depending on your state. Gone, vaporized. You never saw it. You never held it. It just disappeared into a withholding line on a pay stub you barely glanced at. But here is what happens when you retire and start pulling $60,000 a year from a mix of Social Security and a traditional ER. Say $30,000 comes from Social Security. Only about half of that is taxable for most retirees. That is $15,000. Add your $30,000 IR withdrawal, you are at $45,000 in taxable income. Now subtract the standard deduction for someone over 65, which is roughly $17,000. Your actual taxable income just dropped to $28,000. You spent $60,000. You are paying taxes on $28,000. That is a 53% reduction in your tax exposure. And if any of that money comes from a Roth account, that piece is completely invisible to the IRS. Zero tax, zero reporting. It is like that money doesn't exist on paper. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but saving on taxes isn't the same as getting richer. And you're right by itself. It is not. But stack it on top of what comes next, and you'll see why the math starts to feel like a cheat code. The second mechanism is the expense implosion. Not a dip, not a gradual decline. An implosion. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts average annual spending for working-age households between 35 and 54 at over $83,000. For households 65 and older, that number craters to roughly $57,000. That is a $26,000 annual gap every single year. And when you actually trace where that $26,000 went, it reads like a receipt for the privilege of having a job. Commuting costs. The AAA estimates the average American spends about $12,000 a year owning and operating a vehicle. Retirees drive roughly 30% fewer miles. That is $3,600 back in your pocket, just from not sitting in traffic 5 days a week. Work wardrobe, lunches out, the $5.70 Starbucks. That became a daily ritual because you were exhausted and needed caffeine just to function like a human being before 9 a.m. Dry cleaning professional development courses your employer strongly encouraged, but conveniently didn't cover. And then there is the big one nobody talks about, decompression spending. That is my term for the money you blow, specifically because your job is grinding you into dust. The $47 DoorDash order on a Wednesday night because you're too fried to cook. The weekend shopping trip that is really just therapy with a credit card. The vacation you overspent on because you were so burned out. You felt like you deserved it. That spending isn't about want. It is about survival. And it evaporates the second the source of the stress disappears. Here is what really gets me. You were never living on your full salary. You were living on whatever was left after the government took its share. after your employer extracted your energy, and after the act of working itself drained your wallet from 6 different angles. Your paycheck created the expenses. Your paycheck funded the exhaustion economy. And the whole time, you thought that paycheck was the thing keeping you alive. It wasn't. It was the thing keeping the machine alive. You were just the fuel. But it gets worse, because the 2 mechanisms I just described are the obvious ones. The next 6 are where the paycheck paradox really starts to bend reality. The third mechanism is compound interest, finally cashing in its receipts. And this one is the most psychologically violent, because it exposes a truth about your entire working life that nobody had the decency to say out loud. For 30 years, you were the engine. You were the one shoveling money into your 401k every 2 weeks. $200 here, $500 there. You'd check the balance and see it crawl upward. Like a car stuck in first gear, you contributed $300,000 of your own sweat-soaked dollars over 3 decades and thought, this is it. This is my retirement. This is what I built. No, you built the runway. Compound interest built the plane. Because by the time you hit your late 50s and early 60s, that $300,000 you contributed had ballooned into $900,000, maybe $1.2 million. The majority of your retirement wealth wasn't earned by you at all. It was earned by your money while you were asleep, while you were sitting in traffic, while you were arguing with Karen in accounting about expense reports. Your dollars were out there, reproducing like rabbits, in a field with no predators. And here is the part that breaks people's brains. That compounding doesn't clock out when you do. You retire. You start pulling $50,000 a year to live on. But your remaining $950,000 is still compounding at 7 or 8%. That is $66,500 to $76,000 in growth in 1 year. You withdrew $50,000 and gained $70,000. You got richer by doing literally nothing. That is not a retirement strategy. That is a money printer with a pulse. Now I know what you're going to say. What about bad market years? Fair. Some years, the market drops 20%, and your stomach drops with it. But historically, the S&P 500 has averaged roughly 10% annually over the last 50 years, even accounting for crashes, corrections, and full-blown financial apocalypses. The long-term trend is up. The retirees who panic sell during downturns get hurt. The ones who stay the course watch their portfolios recover and keep climbing. It is not about timing. It is about not flinching. The fourth mechanism is Social Security acting as a financial force field around your investments. The average check is about $1,907 a month as of 2024. For a married couple, that is potentially $3,800 a month. $45,600 a year, guaranteed for life, adjusted for inflation. That number alone covers basic living expenses for a huge percentage of retirees. And here is why that matters more than people realize. Every dollar Social Security covers is a dollar you don't pull from your portfolio. Every dollar that stays in your portfolio compounds for another year, another decade, another market cycle. Social Security isn't just income. It is a shield. It is the thing standing between your investment accounts and the constant withdrawals that would drain them dry. That is like having someone else pay your rent, while your savings account quietly doubles in the background. You're not touching the principal. The principal is growing, and every year it grows. The gap between what you have and what you need gets wider in your favor. The fifth mechanism is Medicare slamming the brakes on your single biggest wildcard expense. Before 65, private health insurance for a couple in their early 60s can run $1,800 to $2,400 a month. That is $28,800 a year just to exist with a safety net. But the day Medicare kicks in, that number collapses to $400 or $500 a month. You just freed up $20,000 a year. That money doesn't evaporate. It stays invested. It compounds. It makes you richer while you're picking up prescriptions at Walgreens. Stop for a second and add this up. Lower taxes saved you $15,000. The expense implosion saved you $26,000. Medicare saved you $20,000. Compound growth added $70,000. Social Security handed you $45,000. You didn't have to pull from savings. That is over $176,000 a year in value. That didn't exist when you were working. Your paycheck wasn't the lifeline. It was the tourniquet on a wound that your job itself created. The moment you removed both, the bleeding stopped and the healing started. You were never one paycheck away from disaster. You were one paycheck away from freedom. You just couldn't see it because the check kept coming, and the wound never closed.